Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Rotoworld Football Podcast. My name is Josh Norris. His name is John Daigle. We're almost done.
Week 16.
Week 16 is here. Everyone's fantasy championships are just around the corner. Let's help them out. How you doing, Daigle?
Everything's going well. It was the NBC company Christmas party. I missed you because you said you were sick, but you just didn't go, which is fine. I showed up, and it had died down a little bit, but those things can get crazy.
So it was at a place that has like a driving range, a digital driving range. Was that going on? I know.
It's still going on.
Okay.
But my golfing game has
Yeah,
slowed
how are you
down
as a
since
golfer,
August.
Daigle?
I played a lot this August.
Okay.
But it has slowed down since, so I'm not going to jump back in. Do people golf in the winter? Is that a thing?
Not here. The ground is like cement.
Can you just buy like red balls?
No,
Okay.
it's cement.
All right, well, so I'll just slow down until the spring then.
You know what? I just put a few things together, Daigle. You said you golfed a lot this August.
Yeah.
I was here sitting in this studio a lot in August. You were on the golf course a lot in
No,
August.
remember, I was driving cross country during this time. Remember all
Driving.
this?
By driving, you mean in a golf cart on a golf course?
I mean, I'd get a start the day at the golf course and then jump in a car and drive some more and go on and on and on.
Things make more sense now.
It was for business reasons. You got to network.
Make more sense now. Okay, so today is our normal preview episode. We'll hit on the big 9 games of the weekend. Do want to point you to a few different episodes. Yesterday's episode with Ian Hartitz, really the main focus was talking about our top 5 players of the last decade. It was a really, really fun exercise. I know you loved it, Daigle. And I've loved hearing from all of you, your top 5s as well. So go and listen to that episode and hit me up with your top 5s.
You didn't ask me, and I'm not going to create a list, but Terrell Owens would be my number one.
But the bulk of his career, the high moments weren't in this last decade.
Okay, that's fair.
Right. So that's really what we're looking at. We're not looking at because I didn't list Steve Smith, because most of the biggest points of his career happened before 2010.
So you're trying to tell me Owens as a Bill wasn't impactful?
No.
Okay. Fair.
It's like Jerry Rice as a Tennessee Titan.
That's all fair.
Also, Rotoworld Live this weekend is at Saturday, noon Eastern. Not Sunday, Saturday. That is twitch.tv/Rotoworld.
Saturday noon.
And that comes right on the heels of an Aston Villa match. It should end at the exact point we launch Rotoworld Live. So I could be the most joyful person in the world, or you might have to be...
The game ends right when we go into the show?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
Kickoff at 10, Rotoworld Live kickoff at noon. The next 3 matches for Villa, wildly important, extremely important. They're like make or break for the season. They play the 3 teams that are below them on the table right now, the only 3 teams below them.
Well, if you're going to talk about things people care about, then I'm going to talk about other things people care about, and that is at 4 o'clock, probably after the first game, then I'm going to Rockefeller Center to see the Christmas tree. I'm going to go be tourist in New York. Very excited about that.
Notes from Hayden, who also went to go see the Rockettes.
I'm not going to do that. I did look into musicals, as we know. As you've seen a Disney Princess video, I'm into musicals.
And compilation videos of Disney Princess
Haven't pulled
songs.
the trigger on a ticket yet. But
Okay.
that's just my Saturday. Don't worry about that.
One more note before we kick this episode off. Next week, we will also have your typical Monday morning recap pod where we go game-by-game review of that weekend's games. Again, you'll still have that in your feed on Monday morning, but we won't have your typical Tuesday and Thursday episodes next week because we will all be gone.
Yeah.
We won't be sitting here. Daigle will try to find some golf course to go on to, and I'll be with my family. But we will have a preview episode to end the week.
We'll still have an episode while I'm on the golf course, yes.
Yes, so that preview episode will probably be up next Thursday or next Friday, again for week 17. But you're going to win week 16, so it doesn't matter. Ready for these games, Daigle?
Let's talk about these games that matter.
All right, again, we're going to talk to Pat and Hayden later on, and for continuity purposes, the first 3 games that Daigle and I are going to hit on are all of Saturday's games. It's a good way of doing it. We're smart sometimes. The first matchup is the Houston Texans at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Houston's coming off a super important win over the Tennessee Titans. They're 3-point favorites here. But what I'm drawn to, Daigle, is this total. A total of 51. And that speaks to the type of talent on both of these teams' offenses.
What's funny is that it's actually been bet down an entire field goal. And I wonder if that's because recently, in their past 5 games in particular, and you have to look into the context of the quarterbacks they've played, but the Bucs defense has been better. Their front 7 has been impactful, actually, as Shaq Barrett continues dominating. However, It's going to be interesting because now they are missing the Bucs are missing Mike Evans.
Right.
They're missing Chris Godwin. They're missing Scotty Miller, who had a 33-yard touchdown and then re-aggravated his hamstring and got put on injured reserve. So they're four wide set, 3 wide set. They're going to go in with 4 active receivers, and that is Brashad Perryman, who we saw somehow spike 3 touchdowns on 6 targets. That is Justin Watson, who we discussed the past 2 weeks. Cyril Grayson, who they called up as a track superstar.
Fake name.
And Ishmael Hyman, who played in the AAF last year.
Yeah.
So that is their 4 wide receiver set.
We do need to give credit to Brashad Perryman, though, because it's funny, and I brought this up, and at least I find this level of football statistics humorous, but he is basically on the Bucs because the Browns traded for Odell Beckham. They had agreed to a contract with Brashad Perryman, but once he knew he wasn't going to be a top 2 wide receiver for the Browns, then he goes down to Tampa Bay and was somewhat a top 3 receiver for them this season. But now we see him with 5 touchdowns to his name compared to Odell Beckham's 2 touchdowns to his name this season. In the last 3 games for Perryman, 5 catches, 87 yards, 3 catches, 70 yards and a score, 5 catches, 113 yards, and 3 touchdowns. If people have played him in that span, it's very likely they're in their fantasy championship. So the question is, Daigle, how confident are you starting him in this fantasy championship?
It's similar to the question we had last week with A.J. Brown about A.J. Brown's volume issues. However, as I stated, it wasn't logical, but you should still be starting A.J. Brown over most questions you have for other wide receivers. I'm slightly skeptical about Brashad Perryman. I mean, just to think scores 3 touchdowns on 5 catches. That alone, obviously, is kind of crazy. He's going to be out there for every single snap. It's a terrific matchup. And I think guys we still have question marks about, Cooper Kupp, even someone like Tyler Boyd, I would actually start Perryman over them. But you can draw the line around wide receiver 20 or 21 with confidence this week.
It will be a difficult decision compared to someone like Jarvis Landry. Jarvis Landry faces the Baltimore Ravens, a very difficult individual matchup for him, but he will get more volume maybe than someone like Brashad Perryman.
Landry and guys like Landry and Kirk, their floor is definitely higher. So it's just like last week. You have to ask yourself, do you want the floor or are you willing to chase that ceiling? Because Perryman does have another 100-yard, 2-touchdown game in the bag in this one.
Couple more notes. Jameis Winston, I believe, has 2 straight games of 450-plus passing yards.
904 yards short of Peyton Manning's record. He's not going to get there.
No.
It's 452 yards the next 2 games, but he has, as you said, 450 yards in consecutive games.
So without Mike Evans, without Chris Godwin, it will be interesting to see if he can do that. And switching gears here, low-key, this Tampa Bay pass defense has really improved.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it was the pieces, the defense that we wanted to pick on in the air all season long. And we also know that they are number 1 in defensive DVOA against the run. So this is a defense that now we're hitting our stride of, wanting to win our fantasy championships. It's not really the option that we want to pick on as much. And we talk about it every single week with this Texans offense. It's up to if they hit their big plays or not. And Will Fuller being in the lineup last week, even if he didn't have, those 4 or 5 massive gains that he has the potential to have, he still opens up everything else in this offense, even with his just ability to be on the field. So the question is, and I don't know if it's even predictable or not, because even in good matchups, the Texans haven't been able to do that. But can they hit these big plays against this Bucs secondary?
I still think it's a great matchup for Deshaun Watson, because you look at those 5 games that the Bucs have improved, and it started with the Saints game in New Orleans, in which Sean Payton got engaged 48 hours prior, and they just stayed out all night on Bourbon Street partying. So it makes sense that Saints kind of had flop lag in that one. And then you had Matt Ryan for a struggling offense, Nick Foles, who got benched mid-game, Jacoby Brissett, who hasn't been the same since that ACL injury, and then, of course, last week against David Blau. So they have looked better, but again, they haven't played the best competition. And now you get Deshaun Watson, likely with Will Fuller at full health.
Right.
And so it's different competition altogether.
Super quiet 1,000-yard season by Carlos Hyde, by the way. He's already hit that mark.
2 games left to play, too.
It's wild. Obviously, the Texans can win the AFC South if they win this game. That was a really close game they had last week against Tennessee. They just made the 2 plays that took them over the top in terms of the interception near their own goal line, near the end zone, and then the stopped fake punt. So
and stuffing Derrick Henry at the goal line twice was huge.
All right, next game. Buffalo Bills at the New England Patriots. I think I got this total correct, 38.5?
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah,
That's
unless it's moved a little bit, but
last time these two teams played, much earlier in the season, and it was super close. I don't know if you remember this, Daigle, but neither offense could get anything going. It was very, very tight. And then Josh Allen suffered a head injury, was forced to leave the remainder of the game. So Matt Barkley stepped in, and the Patriots defense just swarmed him, just demolished him. That game was really probably decided by Josh Allen exiting. How do you think this one's going to play out?
it's tough. Now we've gone, that game was week 3?
Yeah, it was super early.
And so we've seen the Patriots offense now for 10, 11 more games since then, and obviously it's been very bad. I do like the Bills to, at the very least, compete in this matchup. And if they do so, it'll probably be on the back of Devin Singletary, who's now just getting every single carry over Frank Gore outside of goal line touches. 18.3 carries over the past month for him as he continues to just log over 70% of the team's snaps among that backfield. That is how you attack. We saw, even in a blowout against the Bengals last week, even Joe Mixon just toppled for over 120 yards rushing. So Singletary should be their X factor in this matchup that they lean on.
You know, this Buffalo Bills team has obviously already locked up a playoff spot. They did that in a weird game against the Pittsburgh Steelers last week.
Yeah.
Where it felt like for stretches, because again, Josh Allen's going against really top defenses the last 2 weeks, and he gets them again this week. Where Brian Daigle, the offensive coordinator for the Bills, went through moments of not seemingly trusting his quarterback. There was a 1st and goal situation where they then ran it 3 straight times and they lost yardage in those situations. But then in the most critical piece, I don't know if he reset himself as a play caller. And it made sense because I was talking with Bills fans on Twitter about this. That Josh Allen is the reason why the offense is kind of moving or not, for better or for worse. So why not just in these pivotal situations go with what you have at quarterback and not just take the ball away from him? Either you ride or die with him. Be the highs and the lows. This is what we always talk about with Josh Allen. So they did that later in the game, again near the goal line, ran an isolation route with Tyler Kroft, who's more of a blocker than he is receiver, and Josh Allen threw a perfect pass on the right side of the field. So it's one where Josh Allen constantly looks confused. Against the Pittsburgh Steelers, is not an accurate deep ball thrower. But if he's on his game, and mainly if he makes the correct move and decision on that second read or that kind of second focus of the play, then the Bills have a strong chance here, but they are 7-point underdogs here.
And in that game, we saw John Brown force himself open despite having tough coverage. So he's going to get that again with the Gilmore shadow heading his way. But in their first matchup, even 11 targets, over 60 yards receiving. It's not an ideal matchup, but it's not the worst one. You can still roll out John Brown despite being skeptical as a low-end wide receiver 3.
Well, yes, but there is plenty of cause for concern.
I know, I totally agree.
Because Josh Allen, against maybe the 3 top defenses he's faced all year in New England, Baltimore, and Pittsburgh, albeit that New England game was shortened, he's completed 47% of his passes, 5 yards per attempt, 2 touchdown passes, and 4 interceptions. What you're banking on is him creating some type of big play, maybe with his legs, maybe connecting on a deep throw, which he just does not do consistently. And again, I'm just nervous he's going to be confused. But then at the same time, again, I don't know if it matters about the opponent, because if Josh Allen just makes that perfect decision, which he is capable of doing, then he has this special inside of him as well. On the New England side, watching that Cincinnati game, I thought for stretches that Bengals defensive line kind of beat up on the Patriots offensive line, especially in the first half. Maybe not the first drive, but at points in the first half. But looking at the offensive DVOA numbers, we've ragged on this Patriots offense all season long, but they're right in the middle of the road. Can they get it going against this really, really good Buffalo Bills defense?
The way they would do it would be on the back of Sony Michel, but you genuinely just can't trust that despite the matchup being good. I mean, how many times in the past 3 weeks alone have we said what's obviously a Sony Michel game, and it turns out it's obviously not a Sony Michel game. Interesting enough, a lot of it did happen in the second half, but still, Rex Burkhead getting more involved last week as well kind of throws a wrench into even James White's usage. So, and we've seen this in the past, right? We saw last year against the Chiefs in the AFC Championship, Rex Burkhead kind of was an X factor. And so they tend to get him more involved. He hasn't been healthy all year.
It's his middle name, it's X factor.
But now potentially healthy, isn't that a guy they start looking more to, especially when they look around and just they're lacking options? it's getting worse for Julian Edelman as well, because Julian Edelman looks more and more banged up as it goes along. Last week alone, I believe it was an 11-week low in snaps he played.
62%.
Yeah, he had to come off the field, 2 catches, because remember, he went into that one, they said he received extra treatment the night before and then was still listed as active. He's been limited now for a month straight in practices, if not out altogether, but still playing. So it's just getting worse and worse for them every single week.
Yeah, there have been a number of weeks where we've sat here and wondered about this Patriots offense. And, there have been moments when I've said, well, they're going to get it together. Tom Brady's at quarterback. This is what they always do. They have struggles at points, but then they put the pieces together when it matters most. Well, if this offense is really going to gel, it's these next 2 weeks. And if it doesn't do it this week, then it's just not going to happen this season. And this is what we have to kind of expect. You mentioned Edelman only played 62% of the snaps. Was a bit of a nice sight to see N'Keal Harry get more and more involved. They even tried to manufacture touches for him a little bit more. And like you mentioned, Sony Michel, 103 yards last week were his most in a game since week 6. We'll just see if the Patriots can even be above average on offense, because again, they've been average at best all season long.
Their headlights, their alarms, like everything needs to be sounding, because no team needs a first-round bye more than they do.
I'll be selfish here and ask this question. Julian Edelman has really gotten me to my fantasy championship in the league, because he's been a super consistent, led the league in targets basically all season long. I don't know how I can trust him right now with how his body is holding up at the moment. Just 2 targets or 2 catches last week in this pivotal week.
I know you mentioned Christian Kirk also on your bench.
Yes.
That's kind of a guy who's ranked probably less than 10 spots lower, but still his floor may be higher in his terrific matchup against the Seahawks. It's just, it's tough. I mean, but also how do you go away in a must-win game? He's going to get double-digit targets, assuming the Patriots don't rush out. And against this defense, like they played the Bengals last week, it was a 20-point lead was foreseeable. But seeing the Bills, the second time 2 divisions team play one another who know each other, like I would imagine Edelman's playing every single down.
And speaking of the division, it's not like New England has the AFC East locked up. If they win this week, they do. But if they don't, that certainly opens the door for the Bills to make that run for the AFC East, which would be an awesome story. Good job, Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane, building that roster with an identity that they wanted.
You don't have confidence, but I think you're still going back to Edelman.
All right, let's close out Saturday's games with the Los Angeles Rams and the San Francisco 49ers. 49ers 6-point home favorites here. A total of 45, and I want to bring up that total of 45 because the last time these two teams played, the Rams lost 7-20. That means the 49ers won 20-7, if you want me to put it in that way. And Jared Goff had 78 total passing yards. So how can we go from a game that had 27 total to now projecting a 45 total this week?
Beats me.
With the 49ers at home, I might add.
Beats me. Maybe because recency bias, what happened against the Falcons, but recall the Niners also had 5 or 6 missing defenders, like important defenders as well. And they still may be missing Jaquiski Tart, but Richard Sherman, Quan Williams, both practicing midweek, both likely to return immediately. So it's still super tough matchup, especially after you saw what Jared Goff did. I can't believe McVay or no one on the broadcast brought up the injured thumb, because it was very clear. Like Jared Goff can whiff on some throws. Even Jared Goff doesn't miss that bad under pressure. Wide open tosses. It was clearly an issue.
He does miss that bad under pressure.
But on 7 or 8 different passes, though, it was every single toss.
Here's a number for you. From a clean pocket, Jared Goff ranks 10th in the league with 73% completion percentage. He's 29th in the league under pressure all season long with 43 completion percentage. This is just who he is. And I understand the thumb is probably just expanding it even more.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
Compounding it even more. But I mean, in this game, and I understand the Rams have kind of changed their identity somewhat in the last few weeks. We saw it with, Cooper Kupp playing fewer snaps. I don't know how it was last week.
Kupp didn't have a catch until the third quarter last week.
So Josh Reynolds, Tyler Higbee obviously taking a paramount role in this offense. And this is kind of why they did what they did in OTAs and pre-training camp with Todd Gurley, trying to save his knee, save his legs for the pivotal moments. And it's been these pivotal moments over the last few weeks. I believe Gurley played like 95% of the snaps last week. This is going back to, hey, let's do everything we can to make sure the running game is established. And I know we can joke about it, but that really is seemingly what the mindset is for the Rams right now. And then we throw play action off of it, especially for Goff outside the pocket, because he's been doing better at that where, the pressure might not be in his face.
The matchup is super tough, but the good news for fantasy players is that there are only 3 options on this team, and that is Robert Woods, who's on the field for every snap, despite it being a tough matchup, Todd Gurley, as we know, they shifted, as you said, the past 5 weeks in general have just been loading up Todd Gurley with carries. In that time, though, Gurley has played 2 games, at least 96% of their snaps, and the Rams were outscored 27-89 in those 2 games. Meaning, no matter what game script is, he's going to get every touch. And we saw that against the Cowboys. They were done by the first half, and yet he was still out there at the end of the fourth quarter catching passes because they have no other options. So Gurley is still safe as an RB2, no matter the matchup ahead of him. And the third one being Tyler Higbee, who's now just a bet on talent tight end 5. You can't possibly bench Tyler Higbee.
Well, I have to consider it. I do.
What are your other options? Because there are only 4 names. No, that's not one of them.
Well, but here's the concern, because I believe Gerald Everett came back to practice, and I believe he was a full participant on Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, he was full on Wednesday. Okay, I didn't know that.
Which is an issue, because over the last 3 games, without Gerald Everett in the lineup, that means, again, Tyler Higbee is basically playing 100% of the snaps. He leads the league in targets, he leads the league in catches at tight end, and leads the league in yards. So
he's been really good.
And I don't know how a team moves away from that, but we don't know if they believe they are better with Gerald Everett on the field and playing that more passing down role than Tyler Higbee and Taylor Munt. Johnny Munt, excuse me.
His mother's going to get angry at you.
Being the other tight end on the field. This is one of those situations where we think we know what is best for the team, and that's throwing the ball to Tyler Higbee, but we don't know what the team thinks is best for the team.
Okay, so if Everett's out, then obviously it's only
Higbee. Higbee's great.
Kelsey,
he's a start.
Ertz, Waller.
Higbee.
4th one. Can't remember the 4th one. Whoever the big 4th tight end is. Kittle.
Andrews.
And then Kittle. I'd start Higbee over Andrews.
Okay.
But if Everett's in, that's the question we're asking here. How far does he move down? So probably then Andrews, and I don't think I start Cook over Higbee.
Okay.
If Everett's in.
We haven't talked about San Francisco at all. First, let me bring up their defense, because, DeForest Buckner's gotten a lot of love. Nick Bosa's gotten a lot of love.
Yep.
I want to bring up Arik Armstead's name right now, because I think Armstead is, over the last couple games, playing better than Buckner right now. And you mentioned some of the injuries that they've had on that defensive line. Well, it's also the deepest defensive line in the NFL. And I really don't think that the Rams' offensive line is just magically changed. I'm not going to say, Jared Goff isn't going to have more than 78 passing yards, which he will, and I bet they score more than 7 points in this game. But I also think it's going to be a rough day at the office for Jared Goff, especially on the road in San Francisco. Quickly, with this 49ers team and their offense, last week in the passing game, it was all George Kittle. 15 catches?
Yeah. Him and Julio Jones somehow matched each other's stat line, stat for stat. It's amazing.
Here's my question, because Deebo Samuel has emerged as a player who is one of the best in yards after catch in the league and has put up fantasy points when getting targets. Emmanuel Sanders, when playing over 80% of the snaps, other than last week, has emerged as a consistent weapon, either with the volume that he's getting or he's finding the end zone. Neither did anything last week.
Nothing.
So how should we progress with them this week?
Deebo Samuel is a low-end wide receiver 3 in my mind, and I have him in a vacuum ranked over Emmanuel Sanders, just barely. But again, remember, this Rams defense, since they added Jalen Ramsey, has been one of the tops in passing defenses in particular. So it's still a concerning matchup for them, all the way through. And the running back situation, it has become Mostert's backfield. Even last week was Mostert's backfield, but it's still Breida and Coleman enough to the extent that, as we said before, Mostert still is a 60% guy. He played 53% of the snaps last week. He's never going to take over the backfield. It's still a committee approach, but it's enough to where you should still trust him in this game.
Right, but he's not a locked-in running back 1.
No, but I still think he's a running back 2.
I agree. And what was interesting, and maybe, Kyle Shanahan had a bit of a revenge game on his mind last week, but we heard that Mostert was going to lead that backfield in touches, which he did. But in that first series, I believe Tevin Coleman got a lot of run. And I mean, he was facing his former team, the Atlanta Falcons. That makes sense. I agree with you. I mean, again, in a perfect world, we would have one running back be the king of this backfield, but you can still rely on Tevin Coleman and like a deep flex. If you're going that far, then, we can still rely on Raheem Mostert. In a deep flex, I would go with Matt Breida.
Correct. And I'm starting both in the finals of the Scott Fish Bowl. So fingers crossed, shout out to me.
Time now to bring on Patrick Bennett Darty for a 3-game preview. He writes the rankings up on Rotoworld. And Pat, it's a pivotal week for the rankings. You always feel the pressure. You thrive in pressure, Pat, but more than any week, it matters this week. Let's start off with the New Orleans Saints against the Tennessee Titans. A 51 total in this game with the Saints on the road as 3-point favorites. It's an important game for the Saints. It's an important game for the Titans. I will say the line moved here from 1-point favorites to the Saints to now 3-point favorites. Pat, the Saints have a top 10 defense, but it's not really one we want to stay away from necessarily. So you still, because Ryan Tannehill, A.J. Brown got people here to their fantasy finals, are you still going with them in this matchup?
I am, opposing Drew Brees in his first ever outdoor game too. So that's a big wild card for this game this week. Maybe the Titans can spring a. Who knows how Drew Brees will react to fresh air? So really, I feel like this game shouldn't even have been on the board. There shouldn't be a Vegas total or a line for this game. Horrible monologue aside.
Yeah, we just no-sold all 3 of your jokes.
Josh,
you did.
We no-sold the first
really
one,
did.
and then you knew that, so you went to the second one. Again, a no-sell, and so you went to the third one. So anytime you can triple down on a joke,
Josh was
it's
shaking
great.
his head the entire time off camera.
I know, I figured he was. But, so, it's week 16. Ryan Tannehill, the question with him is volume. Will he have volume? And, last week, frankly, I thought he looked a little more like Dolphins Ryan Tannehill, but a good Dolphins Ryan Tannehill. And it was because he had 36 attempts. He still got 3 touchdowns in fantasy, one of which was a rushing touchdown. The Saints are a much tougher defense than the Texans, but as you said, the 51 over/under. It's hard to see how Ryan Tannehill doesn't get the requisite volume in this game. And even on low volume, he'd been having QB1 days, and just right now with the weapons he has, like the big play design of his offense, even if he kind of struggles, even if he has some turnovers, takes some sacks like he did in his Dolphins days, I think Ryan Tannehill is going to throw the ball enough to finish as a top 10 or 12 QB. So it is a tough matchup, but I'm riding with Ryan Tannehill in the finals.
And the good news is if Ryan Tannehill does throw the ball a lot, it's only one weapon. It's A.J. Brown, who had a 31% target share finally last week, and there's no one else to trust on this offense.
Pat, let's move on to this Saints offense. We know Drew Brees put up monster numbers last week. You mentioned that. I'll reiterate your joke just in case it can land better this time. This is the first game he's ever played outside in his career. But while that might bring up a question, I also want to bring up the Alvin Kamara question. Only 2 touchdowns this season. Maybe if you even drafted him, you're not even in your fantasy championship. Maybe some people are. What's going on with Alvin Kamara right now, Pat?
Well, it's weird. I mean, obviously, I think part of it wasn't quite the same following the high ankle sprain. Yep. Kind of like what we saw with Saquon Barkley, kind of what we saw with Matt Ryan. People not talking about, when you come back from a high ankle sprain, this is very typical to struggle. And Alvin Kamara, he's basically been like Aaron Jones this year without the touchdowns, not really getting past 11 or 12 carries most weeks. He is doubling up Aaron Jones in average catches. He's catching 6 passes a week. There's the Taysom Hill factor, of course. But I still like Alvin Kamara. To me, he's still a locked-in RB1. When you're a running back, you're getting over 10 carries a game, catching 6 passes a game. I mean, that's pretty compelling usage, even minus goal line work. And it's the goal line work. I mean, it just feels very fluky. This is just kind of like a classic. The NFL season is only a 16-game sample size, and sometimes random stuff happens. And to me, that's probably honestly still the most likely explanation with Alvin Kamara.
And we're definitely starting. I was going to make a bad joke, but then
There's been enough bad jokes in the last 5 minutes of my life. I need to calm down.
I'm so glad I'm able to reset when I start doing that. All right, let's move on. Let's go to the Dallas Cowboys at the Philadelphia Eagles, Pat. This is a 46 total. 2.5 favorites the Cowboys are on the road. We know the last time the Cowboys played, it was one of the best games we've seen from them the past 5 or 6. They absolutely demolished the LA Rams. Pat, they seemingly have the potential to do that against any defense. good or bad defense. And they're getting a bad defense this week in the Philadelphia Eagles, especially in the back half, especially on deep bombs. Could we see a rebound game from Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup this week?
Well, the good thing about the Cowboys is they always follow up a good performance with another good performance. So just
See, that was a good joke.
You gotta laugh. You gotta chuckle.
Very easy team to rely on. When I was looking for things to be worried about this week, Dak Prescott has the shoulder issue. Jerry Jones has claimed that will not be an issue. The Eagles defense, still an easy defense to pass on. They've tightened up a little bit kind of the past 4 or 5 weeks, not quite Bucs or Cardinals level anymore in terms of someone that you kind of like get everyone in the lineup you possibly can against them. But I mean, Amari Cooper has just dominated the Eagles. As a Dallas Cowboy, we'll see very little reason to not expect that trend to continue this week. Michael Gallup, had really, he's seen 10 or more targets in 3 of the past 6 games. I wouldn't let last week's weird game flow, game script dud discourage people from starting Michael Gallup. To me, he's a top 20 guy against this Eagles secondary. And yeah, I mean, I think this will be kind of one of those weird, hard fought, outdoors, cold weather, like really tough late season division games, but I have a lot of confidence in the Cowboys' main skill players getting their fantasy numbers this week.
That's especially after the Dak injury, like to say a lot of confidence, man, because I've been struggling with the Dak decision. And it was Jerry Jones. We know this is a must-win game. Dak is going to play probably no matter what. But just the fact that he reportedly came out last week and told Amari Cooper that, hey, I can't throw the RPO.
That was concerning.
Yeah, and that's why he had 23 pass attempts against the Rams, supposedly. But as you said, it is a terrific matchup, and if someone's going to attack, even though we know Ezekiel Elliott has historically owned the Eagles, it is a great matchup for the Cowboys receivers as a whole.
And, I mean, it's an absolutely pivotal game. This decides the NFC East.
It's a must-win, yeah.
Because after this, I mean, both teams obviously 7-7. The Cowboys get the Washington Redskins to close out the season, and Philadelphia gets the New York Giants to close out the season. So both teams expected to win in Week 17. So whoever wins this one gets it. Pat, on the Philadelphia side, I mean, somehow, and it's ugly every single week, but Carson Wentz still is able, in like easy matchups or, just disgusting games, is able to come back and lead his team to victory. I would say that, I'm not going to rely on, and this isn't rocket science, someone like Greg Ward in the fantasy football finals, but Zach Ertz, and I'll throw out obviously Miles Sanders, because Miles Sanders, Pat, is the most explosive element of this Eagles team and has been for weeks.
He is. Honestly, even Greg Ward, if you're truly desperate, has drawn 9 targets each of the past 2 weeks. He's clearly the only receiver Carson Wentz actually trusts. Of course, he trusts Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. But I feel like Carson Wentz, this isn't really fan, but has been getting a little bit of an unfair rap. He was so bad in the first half of that Monday night game against the Giants. And I think people have kind of ignored the fact he has 8 touchdowns over his past 3 games where, again, this is a period where Greg Ward has largely been running as his number 1 receiver. Miles Sanders he was putting it together against the Giants 2 weeks ago, then kind of got banged up in that second half, and we had the Boston Scott scare. But then Miles Sanders, last week, that was the game we've been waiting for all season with Miles Sanders. And yeah, he's a very intriguing, potentially league-winning RB2 this week. But someone who can make big plays, locked in volume, and someone who can make big plays both as a pass catcher and as a runner. So Miles Sanders, again, it's been an inconsistent season, but I think he's a pretty comfortable 18 to 20 touch projection for me this week. And someone with his big playability, I'm excited about starting him this week.
I am excited about Miles Sanders. My only issue with Carson Wentz is that visually, the Eagles just make everything look hard. That's why we're so turned off by the offense. Because they do have somewhat spry playmakers, but it's ugly watching them force first downs every week. And also, the thing with Greg Ward, though, is that last week, Washington, Zach Ertz was having his way. And you remember the second half, they took their entire secondary and just shifted over to Ertz's side of the field. And that's why Ward saw 8 of his 9 targets in the second half. That's why I'm concerned about him.
And let me
say, it could happen again, of course. I mean, Zach Ertz, I'm assuming, is going to be a game planning priority.
And 18 targets in 2 games, that is consistent volume.
And in many ways, it kind of comes down to this Dallas linebacker core, which has been up and down all season long.
You can't predict what they're going to do.
You can't at all, because Sean Lee might have a great week, or he might be one of the worst linebackers in the league.
Leighton Vander Esch is one of the most under-discussed absences of the 2019 NFL season.
His career
right. And you said that people haven't been given credit for Carson Wentz. I don't want to come off as one of those people. Like, I think Carson Wentz is still a super talented football player, but just because of the environment he's in right now, it's going to look ugly unless he just makes these ludicrous plays like he did last week against the Washington Redskins.
It's one of the best throws
some
of
of
the
those
year.
passes in, like, the back right of the end zone. And he has those in his repertoire, but also I think like the little blips he has in his game can show up more when things around him are going poorly as well. But I mean, you can say that about every quarterback across the league. And I still think Carson Wentz is a top 10 quarterback in the NFL for sure. All right, Pat, let's close it out with the Green Bay Packers and the Minnesota Vikings. 45.5 total. This is Monday Night Football. Minnesota at home, 4.5-point favorites.
The game that is arguably going to decide everyone's fantasy championship.
There is no one else to talk about in this game right now other than Dalvin Cook being out. So that means either Mike Boone and or Alexander Mattison are going to share this backfield. We have no idea how it's going to be handled right now because it's Thursday at 12:41 Eastern. So, Pat, what's your read? First, let's go with this. If Alexander Mattison misses this game because he missed last week's game, how highly are you going to have Mike Boone rated?
Amir Abdullah takeover,
No.
right?
No, stop it.
I had Mike Boone slotted in as the RB13. And then, Mike Zimmer came out. We were talking about it on the Rotoworld Slack, kind of tried to confuse the situation, making it sound like Dalvin Cook might actually play this week. Then we got a report from Adam Schefter, the most reliable in the business, that is very unlikely to play. Very hard to get any smoke signals whatsoever on Alexander Mattison. He seems to be like a true mystery. Hopefully we have a better idea of his status by Sunday morning. But I'm operating right now under the assumption that Mike Boone is probably going to be leading this backfield. Now they've had a whole week to game plan for this. I actually, kidding aside, would expect Amir Abdullah to have some involvement. But, we know this is run-heavy offense. We saw Mike Boone plug and play last week. And I will comfortably have Mike Boone as like an elite RB2, a plug-and-play guy for the fantasy finals, and somewhere in that RB13 to 15 range.
Maybe Abdullah sprinkle in a little bit. I don't want to let everyone walk away from this podcast scared.
Don't get nervous.
Though. Yeah, like Mike Boone is still, as you said.
No, get nervous.
You're hedging here, Pat.
Yeah, Mike Boone is top 15 play with ease. And remember, Abdullah, 4 of his 5 touches only came once Dalvin Cook left and once Mike Boone already punched in his second touchdown to put the team up 39-10 last week. He was just their mop-up guy. Otherwise, it was Mike Boone out touching Abdullah 11-5 once Cook left. Like, this is Boone's backfield.
Abdullah had mixed in, a little bit earlier in the game.
No, he had one touch.
Yeah, well, okay. He was playing some special teams too, I believe. But the way I would look at it is that, I doubt they want Mike Boone, who had not been involved all year, to just suddenly be, a 25 touch player. So all I'm saying, I just wouldn't be surprised if it's a little bit more of a two-back approach.
No.
But again, I feel comfortable enough, of course, having Mike Boone in the top 15 as well. So not to try to over-worry people.
Right.
I think the only thing we need to be nervous about is that this game is played on Monday Night Football. And so we might not know the Alexander Mattison situation before Sunday at 1 or Saturday.
I mean, there's a doomsday scenario where we have 2 game time decisions for this game. I mean, we can't even, not like Dalvin Cook has been ruled out yet.
Especially with
probably going to be. But yeah, we could have some game time decision hell going on with this game.
Especially with 3 pivotal games on Saturday as well. Look, we might find out more news on Friday, but I think worst case scenario is we see one of these backs get 60%, the other back 40%. And I think no matter what, if Mattison or Boone, because I think all 3 are talented, including Dalvin Cook, obviously, but we want one to get the workload. Because if one gets the workload, he's going to be a top 12 scorer this week, and he's going to help people win their fantasy championships. Now, the best scenario to be in, which I might be in, is you have both Mattison and Mike Boone on your roster. So then you have that flex spot open, and you just have that space for either one who's going to head in that game leading the touches.
Who would you flex? Say Madison is like a game time decision.
Right.
And he's playing. Do you truly trust Madison over Mike Boone?
I think in that scenario, I'd go with Mike Boone because I know that Madison has worked as the second running back all year long, and he's looked good. I know some people dislike Alexander Madison out there, including one in the newsroom whose name may be Ian Hartitz, but he's looked good. And in a lot of ways, I know you can say, well, he hasn't broken a lot of tackles or all these situational stats. Well, the situation he hops into is the team up by a lot in the fourth quarter, and they know they're trying to run the football in those scenarios, and you just plug Madison in as a closer.
I just don't I don't think it matters if he's looked good. The fact is, if Madison's active, that takes away everyone.
Right.
Like that even takes away Mike Boone from being a league-winning option. That's why I think Friday night I'll probably have to conjure up a list of like 12 or 13 running backs that I would start no matter the situation, and then we can assess from there because it's going to be a super tough decision.
Now time for Hayden Winks, the fantasy forecaster himself. Look, if you've put off reading the fantasy forecast for 15 weeks of the season, shame on you, one. But two, go and check it out. Now
too late.
Is the week to check it out when it's the most meaningful. Hayden, all right, let's start off. The Arizona Cardinals at the Seattle Seahawks. Massive total in this game of 50. Seattle at home here, 9.5-point favorites. From a margin of victory standpoint, Hayden, it kind of makes all the difference in the world that Seattle is at home here because we see them struggle no matter where they go basically on the road. But here is a smash spot against this Cardinals defense.
Yeah, all these guys are going to eat. The Cardinals can't stop anybody on the run. And the air against tight ends are by far the worst defense. So obviously Russell Wilson is going to be in play as like a top 5 option. Same thing with Chris Carson. The one person I want to highlight on the Seahawks is Tyler Lockett. He's been the wide receiver 43 since the Week 11 bye. But I think we can kind of chalk that up to his injuries and his illness. And last year he posted an 8-121 receiving line. And I think that's kind of the positive news we needed to get him back into the top 15 mix this week.
Your opinion then, where does DK Metcalf fall as well? Because that's someone in the wide receiver 3 range, I would say, that people are going to have a tough decision with. Maybe he's even a wide receiver 2 this week, honestly.
Yeah, I called him. I think I'm going to call him a upside wide receiver 3 in my column. His air yards have been really consistent week to week, but that doesn't mean his production's been quite as consistent. Just he's targeted deep downfield and in the red zone so frequently, so he's going to be a boomer bust asset. But against the Cardinals, you definitely want to line up. 3
names on the Cardinals here. We've seen Kyler Murray have wonderful weeks. We've seen Christian Kirk have really good weeks, but he's dealing with an injury. And then last week we saw Kenyon Drake, have 3 touchdowns?
4.
4 touchdowns.
4.
Woo. So, based on that Kenyon Drake performance, a lot of those people are in their fantasy final. Look, the Seahawks defense, again, an up and down roller coaster for them as well. How are you handling these 3 Cardinals offensive players?
Well, the one thing I'm tracking is I think the Seahawks injury report on Wednesday was the worst in the league on defense. They had multiple plus-level starters on the injury report. They were even DNPs. So that's something I'm going to be tracking. If some of those guys are missing, then I would be a lot more confident in Kyler Murray. I do like the over in this game just in general. The Seahawks, just because of those injuries, and I think both these offenses can really get going with 2 kind of running, scrambling quarterbacks, and then basically everyone on the offense is healthy on both teams.
As you said, Seahawks had 5 players leave early last week. They are creating pressure at the league's lowest rate right now. And among those injuries that could be out this week, Shaq Griffin, Michael Kendricks, Jadeveon Clowney, just important players all around. And so I know Kyler let us down last week, but even in the fantasy championship, I absolutely love this spot for him.
Hayden, let's go to the next game. That's the Oakland Raiders at the Los Angeles Chargers. We know what happened to Oakland last week. I mean, they had that win against the Jaguars, then they just completely let it go in the last game.
The last game in
at
Oakland.
the Coliseum. We talked about Mike Boone earlier in the podcast, stepping in for Dalvin Cook. Well, there's going to be no Josh Jacobs, it seems like, for the remainder of the year.
Probably.
Which meaning this week as well. So probably DeAndre Washington gets at least 17 touches in this game. How close are you, with everyone praising Mike Boone and how he might win fantasy championships, to DeAndre Washington doing the same thing?
Yeah, he's a low-end RB2 right now. The last time he started, 14 carries, 7 targets on 63% of the snaps, and that was in a 21-point loss. So if the game's closer, which obviously it should be closer, I'm expecting at least 15 carries from DeAndre Washington, sprinkling a couple targets in there, and then you got low-end RB2. I think Mike Boone's going to be ranked way higher, especially if Alexander Mattison is in fact out. Then I think Mike Boone would be like a top 10 option. DeAndre Washington would be closer to like RB20.
There were concerns about Melvin Gordon. He was obviously benched after his second fumble in that game, but also game script got out of hand. That's why he matched Eckler in snaps and targets. 7 carries from Melvin Gordon last week. with game script that we can project will likely be better in Los Angeles' final home regular season finale, as well as possibly Phillip Rivers' last career game in Los Angeles, are you trusting Melvin Gordon in this matchup, or is it a game that people should fire up Eckler over him?
Yeah, I think that I have them right next to each other in my initial rankings. Eckler's just been so efficient. The thing with Eckler is he's only averaging 6.3 carries and 5.4 receptions with Melvin this year. He's been insanely efficient. He has like 8 receiving touchdowns this year, and he's averaging 9.8 yards per target, which is, I think, the 3rd highest of all time among running backs with at least 50 targets. So he's just been so efficient, and I want to keep believing in him, especially in this matchup. So Eckler's a top 15 running back, and I think I would still go back to the well with Melvin Gordon. The matchup's just too good. If you're getting a deflated Raiders defense that's already terrible on paper, I think you're going to want Melvin Gordon as RB2.
Yeah, so what Daigle just brought up is interesting because when you look at this game, these like final 2 weeks kind of maybe, possibly, decide the futures of both these quarterbacks.
Sure.
With Derek Carr, some people might love him in Oakland Raider circles, but then he's a limited player, right? He's not someone who can really carry you when the ball doesn't go where it's supposed to in the period of time it's supposed to. Outside of structure. People get mad when I say outside of structure. That's what I mean by that.
No, it's fine. That's what it is.
But then with Phillip Rivers, it's just been, he has no arm left. Where Phillip Rivers in the past has really worked the pocket very well and was one of the best anticipation throwers in the NFL, throwing to a spot and expecting his receiver to run underneath it. Now it's like, I have no idea where this ball is going. It might go straight to a defender, and it's doing that a lot this year. So, again, this might be one of the last 2 weeks we see both Phillip Rivers, I wouldn't be shocked if we see Tyrod Taylor in this game, and then Derek Carr with the Oakland Raiders as well.
Yeah, this is a good spot for both of these teams to move on from these quarterbacks just going into new stadiums. They both need a refresh. They're both going to be picking around the 10th overall pick in the draft. Maybe they get Herbert falls or we get better news with Tua. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if both of these quarterbacks are playing on different teams or Phillip Rivers just retires in general. Rivers has just been struggling, and this is with really strong skill position players. Yep. 2 good running backs, 2 good receivers, and then a top 10 tight end as well.
And remember, both Melvin Gordon and Austin Eckler free agents at the end of the year, so perhaps that 2 fumbles just sealed Gordon's fate altogether.
And we know Hayden wouldn't pay either of them because he doesn't like to pay running backs. All right.
Maybe Eckler. Maybe nope. Eckler.
I heard you wouldn't pay Christian McCaffrey, you said. You're going to pay Austin Eckler?
Well, I don't think...
It would also cost money for Eckler.
All right, let's close it out with Sunday Night Football. Kansas City Chiefs at the Chicago Bears. Really fun matchup here. 5.5-point favorites. The Chiefs are a total of 45.5. Hayden, Patrick Mahomes was back to his magic last week in a bad situation. It was in a blizzard. He was falling away from throws, making ones that maybe no one else in the league could make. But prior to that, some uncomfortable games from a production standpoint. Again, this Bears team is nowhere near defensively where they were in 2018. I think they're getting Akeem Hicks back this week. So it's a defense that we do need to worry about on some level. But also, Hayden, this Chiefs offense is very narrow now with Mahomes to Kelsey and Tyreek Hill, and that's it.
Yeah, the Bears haven't allowed 20 fantasy points to an opposing quarterback this year. I think I'm guessing that's the only team that's done that. And yeah, Mahomes, to me, in my notes I wrote that this was the best he's looked since his injury. Even I think against the Titans, he had 450 yards and 3 touchdowns. I think he looked better last week, more mobile, back to those explosion plays. But yeah, like you said, it's Travis Kelsey with elite production, elite usage, and then Tyreek Hill, the same thing, 2 touchdowns last week. And even Sammy Watkins still is being utilized. He just does nothing with them. It's super frustrating. But against the Bears on the road, obviously you're going to be fading Sammy. So it's just Mahomes, Kelsey, and Tyreek.
Let's go to this Bears side because we know, as we said, the Chiefs have a concentrated target tree. We know the guys we're playing. We can't trust any of their backfield, even if Damian Williams comes back. But for the Bears, Mitchell Trubisky has been a top 5 quarterback, given matchups, but a top 5 quarterback the past 5 weeks now. And he has reliable receivers in Allen Robinson and Anthony Miller, who have also been top 16 receivers in that span. But this Kansas City secondary is so underrated. Number 6 in pass defense DVOA, go further in the advanced metrics, and they're top 7 in EPA allowed. They have been incredible. And so how do you think Trubisky will fare attacking them in this particular game.
Not well. Not well.
Yeah, I think there's too many quarterbacks on like a 32 team slate to worry about Trubisky against the Chiefs. But I am interested in Anthony Miller, but only if Taylor Gabriel is in fact out. He hasn't practiced. He's still in the concussion protocol. So the last 3 games without Gabriel, 7 receptions, 100 yards, and 0.7 touchdowns. Those are his averages. That's like a really strong wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 production. If Gabriel's out, he's like a flex play at least for me. And then obviously we're firing up Allen Robinson.
All right. That's going to do us. Go and check out Hayden's fantasy forecast column and obviously Pat's rankings. Again, want to reiterate, Daigle, this Saturday, noon Eastern, on the heels of an Aston Villa victory, we will be in Studio 2 with Rotoworld Live. That's twitch.tv/Rotoworld. We will have more Mike Boone information at that point, Alexander Madison information at that point, we hope. So we're going to spend that time setting your optimal lineups, answering your questions, and previewing games. That does it for us. If you enjoyed the podcast, rate and review, tell one friend. We'll talk to y'all soon. See you, everyone.